We're all in some way shaped by stories. They build our world, they tell us who we are, what's possible. But what happens when we decide to stop being just characters in a story someone else wrote? What happens when we decide to pick up the pen ourselves?
So how does a shift like that actually happen? Well, in this explainer, we're going to walk through 5 key ideas. We'll start with what I'm calling the old conversation, and then dive into what it really means to write back to self. From there, we'll look at the actual tools an author uses, things like deconstructing folklore and using painted metaphors. And we'll see how it all leads to creating a brand new kind of hero, the self-reflective author of their own life. All right, so for a long time, post-colonial literature was pretty much seen through one lens, and that was the writing back to the empire model. It was all about literature as a response, a reaction, an argument against an external colonial power. And this slide just lays out that shift perfectly. On the left, you've got that reactive art. It's defined by its opposition to something outside of itself. But look to the right. The focus totally flips. It becomes an art of self-affirmation. The conversation turns inward, and it's all about local realities, local texts, and self-perception. It's not about the other anymore, it's about the self.
And that brings us to the heart of it all, this huge paradigm shift to writing back to self. A scholar named Maina Mwangi pointed out that a whole new wave of African literature isn't really talking to the West. Instead, it's writing back to itself. It's creating this rich, complex, internal conversation between authors and cultures right there on the continent. So, how do they do this? One of the key tools is something called metafiction. And as you can see here, it's basically fiction that knows it's fiction. It's self-aware. And by constantly pointing out that it's a story, it forces us, the reader, to really question the blurry line between the stories we're told and the reality we live in.
This quote just nails it. It suggests that real resistance, the most powerful kind, isn't always about a direct fight. Sometimes it's just about demoting that old power, about deciding it's no longer the center of your universe. By simply turning away and starting a new conversation, the old story just fades into irrelevance.
And this part is so important. This isn't an art of resentment. That idea of holding a grudge, of defining yourself by what you're against. Nope. This is a constructive, positive act. It's about looking inward to build something new, not just spending all your energy trying to tear down the old thing. So, how does an author actually do this? How do they write back to self? Well, the first tool in the toolkit is a really fascinating one. It involves taking apart the very stories we've all been told our whole lives, the folklore and myths that are supposed to be the bedrock of a culture. So instead of just retelling old tales, these writers become active editors. They use those powerful oral traditions, but they do it with a healthy dose of skepticism. They challenge the patriarchal ideas hiding in plain sight within the old myths. They flip the classic heroic epic on its head to tell women's stories. And they use this whole process for something called kujikosoa, an act of honest self-critique. It's all about using the past to question the present.
Now, the second tool is just as powerful. This is where writers bring a completely different art form onto the page, the visual arts. They use these vivid descriptions of paintings, sculptures, and drawings as painted metaphors to get at really complex ideas.
And these painted metaphors, they let authors say things that words alone just can't capture. By weaving a piece of visual art like this one right into the story, a character's reaction to it can reveal their deepest struggles and internal conflicts. The art itself becomes a whole new language, one that's used to deconstruct old, static ideas and open up a more fluid, dynamic conversation about identity. And out of this new way of telling stories, this whole process of deconstructing old myths and using new metaphors, a new kind of hero is born. And we call this hero the self-reflexive hero.
This hero is fundamentally different. They see the narratives that have been imposed on them, the traumas from the past, but they refuse to be a puppet. They're no longer just a passive character who is defined by someone else's plot.
Instead, they become an active editor of their own reality. They're conscious of the stories that have made them who they are, and they use that awareness to revise, to remix, and ultimately, to rewrite their own world.
You can actually map out their journey. It starts with step 1, acknowledge the old story. You can't ignore it. Then, step 2, use those artistic tools we've been talking about to deconstruct it. Step 3 is when you start to rewrite the rules of the world around you. And finally, in step 4, you reclaim your power and become the author of your own life. You become the life author.
But here's the thing. Writing back to self isn't about pretending everything's perfect. This quote really gets at the nuance. It's an art of positive self-affirmation, yes, but one that is not blind to internal problems. It's an incredibly empowering act of honest self-reflection. It's about celebrating your strengths while also having the courage to face your own challenges head-on.
And that leaves us with a final, really powerful question. Because we are all living inside narratives, personal ones, family ones, cultural ones. So maybe we can take a page from these authors and just ask ourselves, what's the dominant story in my life, and how can I pick up the pen and become its author?